While some would argue that the Pixel 6 was a big change, I would say that the Pixel 4 was an even bigger change for Google. I would honestly say that Google was actually ahead of their time with this one. Hello everyone, this is Matt from Real World Review, and today I'm going to review the Google Pixel 4 and let you know what it's like using the phone now in 2023. Let's get started. Now, when this phone came out, I thought they made all the dumb choices. Sure, they went with the flagship chip of 2019, the Snapdragon 855 chip with 6GB of RAM. Even now, this is actually pretty solid, leaving me with no issues when dealing with normal apps, and even when gaming, it runs well. Sure, some of the graphic-intensive games give frame drops, but this phone can run 1080p 60 frames per second games pretty well. The screen is a 5.7-inch 1080p display that runs at 90Hz, a very 2019 thing to do as well. It's an OLED panel and it has Gorilla Glass 5, though scratches exist, as you can see right now. There is a chin and forehead, don't worry, we'll get to that later. Front-facing speakers are awesome, but Google said no for this phone. There is a little earpiece loudspeaker, and then there's the one on the bottom. It's actually not bad, sounding pretty good and giving a decent stereo feel, but it's not equal to what the Pixel 2 and the Pixel 3 phones were. While we're here, let's talk about that USB-C 3.1 port. This allows for 18 watts of wired charging, which is fine for the battery size, and we still have wireless charging at decent speeds. Those are the options to charge up the 2. Yes, I'm going to start the battery size with the 2. It's a 2800 milliamp cell that isn't that good, but also isn't that bad. This is a 4-year-old phone that lasts all day for me, but I can understand why people would hate this phone for the battery alone. That, and it's common for batteries to expand in this phone, forcing you to replace the battery. For me, I don't see that to be a bad thing because replacing the battery is light work, but for the average person, I can see how it can be frustrating. By the way, did you notice that I didn't point out that this phone does not have a headset jack? This phone is supposed to be IP68 dust and water resistant, but let's assume that the water resistance is long gone. Alright, let me tell you about the frame, which was somewhat controversial. The phone has glass on the front and back, both Gorilla Glass 5, but the back has a matte finish that feels almost gel-like when you drag your nail across it. The black phone, for some reason, has a glossy finish though. Here is where we get that camera box that Google actually leaked months prior to its release, but I think it was just because Apple was going to do a similar style that year. It was honestly such a weird move looking back at that. This was the first dual camera Pixel, well, at least on the back. The frame is a matte aluminum with a microphone hole on the top, SIM card tray on the left side, and on the right is where the power and volume buttons are. Then of course on the bottom is where the USB-C port, speaker, and microphone all sit, but we often forget that the sides are where the squeeze sensors are. This one being the last Pixel that has a feature to squeeze for assistant. It was a gimmicky feature, but it's technically not that gimmicky. On the front, there's a plastic trim around the screen, but then we have that forehead, which we not only get the front camera and the earpiece, but we also get solely radars, which helps for the only 3D face unlocking on a Pixel phone, even now, but also motion sense. This allows you to pause, play, skip songs, replay songs, snooze alarms, and silence calls. That's it, and yes, the Pixel 4 and 4 XL were the first ones to do it and the last ones to do it. I wonder how much money was wasted there. Though it should be noted that Google did put this tech in a Nest device, so it wasn't a complete waste. This is a 4G phone, but this was acceptable at the time and technically still is. There's no Wi-Fi 6 as well, but again, not a common thing at launch. This phone is a little bit taller than the Zenfone 9, so it's safe to say that this phone isn't a super compact device, but also isn't a big phone. And at 162 grams, it's nice to hold. One thing that is somewhat of a letdown is that this phone is running Android 13 and only has 64GB of storage. While neither are complete letdowns, this phone is done receiving any updates as of October of 2022, and there's no expandable storage. They make 128GB versions of this phone, but that's it. Not sure why they stuck with those two options. Speaking of options, watch these videos ad-free when you join the membership. For $2, you get these videos when I make them, and with no ads. Imagine that, ad-free and early videos. Now back to this video. Similar to iPhones, Pixel cameras are some of the most sought-after phone cameras ever. And even when you look at the Zenfone 9, I love the contrasty shots because they remind me of the Pixel phones. Then there's the fact that Google mastered the 12 megapixel camera not only in search of being perfect, but also probably to save money. Either way, the front camera is an 8 megapixel sensor that works. Coming from the Pixel 3, it's weird to go from 2 cameras to one fixed focus sensor, as well as it only shooting 1080p 30 frames per second video. The camera itself is pretty good though, especially in portrait mode. The rear sensors are weird ones. The main one is a 12.2 megapixel camera, while the other is a 16 megapixel 2x telephoto sensor, which are both optically stabilized, as well as maxing out at 4K 30 frames per second video. This was ultimately a weird choice, seeing that Apple went with an ultra-wide camera over the telephoto, and Samsung had both cameras on their phones. A choice that at that time felt dumb, but today I feel like the telephoto sensor was actually the right choice. It's the reason I go for Pixel Pro models now, and why this phone camera works. After all, this phone is a Pixel, so I'll just let the shots speak for themselves. While the camera setup was weird and even a stupid one when the phone launched, I feel like this ultimately was the right choice. And this is the trend of the phone. This was a phone that was considered a failure just because of the stuff that it had in it. The iPhone 11 series phones are over 3,000 milliamp batteries, but the Pixel 4 was just 2,800. It's a small battery with bad battery life, and, well, I can't really spin that to be beneficial, obviously. The cameras, like I said, were a weird choice at the launch because everyone wanted ultra-wide, but now I feel like this trend has died down. People want a zooming camera, and you can get it in a phone that isn't $1,000 MSRP. 64 gigabytes is rough, but that would explain why they rejected 4K 60 frames per second video capture for the second year in a row, even though the 2017 iPhones that had 64 gigabytes could still do it. I get why some people don't like these phones, but you gotta admit that some of the specs were chosen properly. We just weren't ready in 2019. I love reviewing phones that came out in 2019. I feel like it was the best year for phones, even if there were some major corners that got cut on some of them. This phone was a departure and a risk that Google made, which I respect now, but also understand that it might have not been as successful as the Pixel 6 or 7 series have been so far. This is one of the coolest designed Pixels outside of the Pixel 7 Pro, at least in my eyes. For some, this is just a Pixel that kind of copied what the iPhone 11 was slated to look like. That was such a weird time. And that's my review of the Pixel 4, the Pixel phone with Face ID. But what do you think about this phone? Is the battery life truly miserable? Let me know on here or on the socials, and as always, thanks for watching.